Gather round, young people, and let me tell you about a simpler, gentler time. When I was your age, conspiracy theories were about the existence of Sasquatch or aliens. There was a popular TV show called The X-Files starring a man named David Duchovny, who also hosted a softcore porn show late at night, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, conspiracy theories were goofy, fun, and mostly harmless. How then did we get here? Today, conspiracy theories flourish like measles in a Marin County Montessori. How did the extreme become so mainstream? Our next guest went above and beyond the call of duty, spending years of her life talking to conspiracy theorists from coast to coast while researching her new book, Republic of Lies, American Conspiracy Theorists and Their Surprising Rise to Power. Anna Merlan, reporter for Gizmodo Media Group, joins us today. Welcome to 112BK.
Thanks for having me.
So I was really impressed by how in-depth you went in your reporting for this book. You went on a cruise with conspiracy theorists. You attended conferences. What was that like, spending so much intimate time with people who believe fringe things?
So the cruise was actually how I started thinking about writing the book. The cruise was for Jezebel, the feminist website that's part of Gizmodo Media Group. And the cruise was in January of 2016. And so while I was there, I noticed that a lot of the folks on the cruise were really excited about Donald Trump and really saw him as like a truth teller who spoke to a lot of their beliefs about how things worked. And I thought, it's so interesting the way that he's like reviving all of these different groups and sort of bringing them closer to the mainstream.
He's a real unifier.
Yeah, he's a real unifier. And so what's going to happen when he loses? And then he didn't. And so in some ways, the process of researching and writing this book was a process of trying to understand how America actually works and how it actually thinks and the ways that conspiracy theories impact us and have historically for so many years, because as it turns out, I don't understand this country as well as I thought I did.
And when you would go into gatherings of people who believe conspiracy theorists, would you tell them what you were there for?
Yeah.
Was there distrust of you as a member of the MSM?
Yes and yes. I always announce who I am. You know, I don't sneak into anything. And yeah, there was a lot of everything from I was a possible CIA agent to a couple people on the cruise.
Are you a CIA agent?
I don't think they would have me.
Okay.
To just, you know, you're here to make us look stupid, you're here to make fun of us, to you must be a paid shill for Big Pharma.
Were you surprised over time? Like, is there, as somebody who doesn't engage that frequently with conspiracy theorists, are there assumptions that I might make that you have a different opinion on?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you don't think you engage with conspiracy theorists, you do, because statistically, most people in America, about 50% of us, or 1 in 3, believe in at least one conspiracy theory. And so the kinds of conspiracy theories that you believe in are pretty mediated by your cultural and economic and social and educational background. So if you don't have to engage with conspiracy theories a lot of the time, it's probably because you are somebody for whom America has like worked pretty well, and you haven't really needed to engage in conspiracy thinking. That's often the case, not always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are some of the most commonly believed conspiracy theories?
Well, the most common sort of benign one is that the government is not telling us everything they know about aliens or alien visitation or alien technology. The sense that the JFK assassination has been covered up in some way, or the government is not telling us everything they know about that, is a very common one. On the right, the idea that at some point our guns are going to get taken away is relatively common. Among Trump voters, the completely false notion that Barack Obama was born in Kenya still has a lot of traction, a lot more than perhaps it should. You know, 7 years after he had or 8 years now after he had a press conference to produce his long-form birth certificate. So there are a lot.
You mentioned this connection between disenfranchisement and a belief in conspiracy theories.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe let's talk about it in context of the African-American community.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of studies that essentially show that people who are disenfranchised or disadvantaged are slightly more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, and we see that especially with Black Americans. And so I have a chapter in my book that is about conspiracy theories in Black America, which are real specific. They are ones that we don't see often in other sections of the population and are very rooted in actual historical events that happened to Black people over the course of American history. So a lot of conspiracy theories in Black America are fundamentally about distrust of the medical establishment, because there have been so many actual medical conspiracies that have been perpetrated against Black Americans throughout history, and about sort of generally a sense that the government is not fully trustworthy and is not really taking care of you, which is, again, for a lot of Black families, an incredibly sympathetic and historically very true thing. So yeah, the one that I started out talking about is this belief among a lot of people in New Orleans that the levees during Katrina were deliberately blown up. And what I explained was, while we don't have a lot of proof that that is the case, we do know that during the 1927 Mississippi flood, levees south of New Orleans were in fact deliberately blown up to save the city, was the theory. But what ended up happening was that decision to dynamite the levees flooded these low-lying areas, left a lot of people homeless, killed a number of people, we still don't know how many, and triggered one of the greatest mass migrations in American history. So the fact that this idea that maybe the levees were blown up in Katrina recurred is really evidence of this very deep historical trauma.
And how did people respond when you would call something a conspiracy theory?
I mean, it's considered very offensive. Obviously, people who we're all in the pool statistically as Americans, but people who are in the deep end of the pool told me many times that they prefer to be referred to as members of the truth community or the research community. So yeah,
that's
a lot
great
of
branding.
Sure,
I feel like I'm a member of the truth community.
I feel like we're all members of the truth
Right.
community.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we work in journalism,
Right,
so maybe
exactly.
not.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would just tell me, how can you possibly trust the government? How can you possibly trust the CDC? Are you really that gullible? And you sort of get to a point where you're like, I understand the point that you're making, and it's hard to argue against on its merits.
What do you respond when somebody says, how can you possibly trust the government?
I mean, I had this conversation yesterday with an anti-vaccine activist who I was interviewing for something, and what I say is that I don't trust every government agency equally. I don't take anything that they tell me at face value, but when it comes to, for instance, the issue of vaccines, I trust the thousands of medical experts and medical bodies who have done studies that determine that they're safe. I would say that we are not required to trust anybody, but I do think we can trust objective facts and science and objective reality at some point. But everybody's definition of that is different, so maybe it's not an answerable question.
Let's talk a little bit about vaccines. Very topical right now.
Yeah.
In certain parts of Williamsburg, New York City has said that it's mandatory vaccinations because of measles outbreaks.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-vaccination is always one of those interesting nodes to me, where it's like an Ouroboros where the far right and the far left are in a sandbox.
Totally, yeah.
Why is that? Why does this specific arena appeal to people on both sides of the political spectrum who probably voted for different people?
Yeah, it taps into distrust of the government, which has adherents on the left and the right, and also concepts about natural health and natural immunity that are popular on the left and that we're just seeing more and more of. We're having a resurgence of, for instance, fake cancer cures, natural cancer cures that were first popular in the 70s. So yeah, anti-vaccine is one of those areas where everybody can kind of find a way into it, even if it's just, I don't think the government has the right to tell me what to do with my body. There's a lot of ways into that one.
It's a big unvaccinated tent.
Yep, it sure is.
So this book is largely about the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Is the U.S. Are we here in the U.S. more susceptible to conspiracy theories? Is this a uniquely American proposition?
It's definitely not uniquely American. We know that conspiracy theories tend to thrive a lot of times in repressive countries or in countries with authoritarian regimes. I think that the thing that makes the U.S. so particularly prone to them is a couple things. First of all, we have a really vibrant free press, which is great. Obviously, we would both agree on that. We have a lot of mechanisms to express ourselves. We have a lot of technology. We also have an extremely opaque financial system, healthcare system, a system of government that a lot of people do not feel represented by. And all of those things together contribute to a sense of anger, a sense of powerlessness, a sense of disenfranchisement that leads pretty directly to conspiracy theories. So we see stuff that you would not expect to see in a nominally democratic country.
So we've been talking a lot about the role of the internet and social media in breeding conspiracy theories. Talk to me a little bit about Russian interference in the election. They peddled all of these different conspiracy theories, and they were able to target them to specific communities.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there was disinformation coming out of elements of the Russian government for a really long time. I talk about in my book, after the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill, there were, armies of trolls and bots spreading misinformation about the oil spill. So, this is a long-standing thing, this idea of misinformation. What we know happened during the election is that these same sort of bot and troll entities were engaged in trying to exploit, pre-existing divisions in America. So, for instance, we know that there were a bunch of Facebook pages set up to sort of argue both sides of really heated issues like gun control.
What role, or I guess we know the role, but what responsibility do social media companies have for this increasing fragmentation and mainstreaming of conspiracy theories? What would you like to see Jack and Mark take a stand on?
I have so many arguments and debates about this with myself and with other people. So I talked to Lenny Posner, who is a Sandy Hook dad. He lost his youngest son, Noah, at Sandy Hook. And he also is somebody who's increasingly come to believe that the internet needs to be a lot more regulated. And that's the only way we're going to kind of get out of this. I really have trouble with that, just as a sort of basic matter of free speech and free democracy. I'm also really uneasy about Facebook and Twitter's ability to actually regulate and fact check and flag misinformation. I really think that Facebook and Twitter and other social media companies have built these platforms that are so big, they really can't control them. It's a pipeline, and it's really hard to guarantee that the pipeline is only delivering clean water and not sewage.
Tell me about Pizzagate.
Yeah.
I guess we have to talk about Pizzagate.
Sure. Yeah. So Pizzagate was the conspiracy theory that there was a sex trafficking ring involving high-level Democratic Party officials that was operating out of the basement of a pizza parlor. And the reason why most people know about Pizzagate is because eventually a believer in Pizzagate went to the pizza parlor with a gun intending to rescue the children. And very luckily, he did not hurt anybody, but it was really sort of a reminder that stuff leaks off of the internet and into real life.
And he found that there was no basement and therefore no children being held captive in the basement. And he put down his guns and he turned himself in.
He did.
But it seems like that was lucky, right? It could have gone very differently.
And even when he was sitting in jail and a New York Times reporter went to see him, he had trouble saying that he had been wrong. He said something, I think he said, the intel on this wasn't 100%. And then I went to his sentencing hearing, and the judge pointed out that he had never actually really fully admitted that he had been completely wrong. He apologized for any innocent people that he might have scared, but did he actually say, I've come to believe that all this is fake? No, because again, once something is entrenched, it's really, really, really hard for us to fully change our minds.
Right. And it's interesting the blips that emerge around which conspiracy theorists gather. We talked about vaccines being one of them, Jews, obviously a huge one.
Yeah.
Pedophilia is one as well. And that struck me as surprising until you talked a little bit more about it. Why is pedophilia something that conspiracy theorists are drawn to?
So I pointed out this thing that several historians have written about called the nocturnal ritual fantasy. A historian whose last name is Cohn and whose first name I'm forgetting has written about this idea that literally since the Middle Ages, there's this conspiracy theory that there are secret groups of evildoers meeting in secret underground at night to have black masses and orgies and solidify their bonds by abusing children. So in some ways, the idea of violence against children as the most sort of sinister element of any conspiracy theory is really old. It's really deep. I also came to believe that one of the reasons why it kept recurring, I heard it about it from the Pizzagate folks. I heard about it from white supremacists that I interviewed who were convinced that, everybody in the government is a child abuser. I heard about it in the UFO world. I came to believe that all these people were so convinced that their opponents were pedophiles because that is literally the worst thing you can be, right? There is nothing worse than abusing children. And so I think it was a way for people to say, my opponent is so evil, they are so sick that I am justified in doing anything I need to do to take them out of circulation.
That's really interesting that it's the ultimate way to dehumanize someone by calling them a pedophile.
Yeah, it is. And it was one of the only things that somebody said to me in the course of reporting the book that I was truly offended by. And I'm Jewish, and I was talking to Nazis. So the fact that there was only one thing that really, offended me and offended my sensibilities should, tell you something.
So let's talk a little bit about anti-Semitism and how so many conspiracy theories can be traced back to roots in anti-Semitic thinking. I guess first tell me a little bit about that, and then I'm curious about your own experience as somebody who identifies as Jewish as well in talking to people who hate Jews.
Yeah. So anti-Semitism is a really, really old prejudice and hatred, and it is fundamentally a conspiratorial one because it is the belief that Jews are not just evil or subhuman or other, it's the belief that Jews are working in secret to affect global control, that Jews are a cabal that control everything from the banking system to the weather, right? And so a lot of times it was interesting to me because I would be talking to white supremacists and they're repeating ideas to me that are literally medieval in nature. The idea of the blood libel, the idea that Jews slaughter children and use their blood in our matzah meal is something, again, that is from the Middle Ages that now recurs. It was sort of an element for some people in Pizzagate. It's something that gets referred to a lot among anti-Semitic politicians across the world, especially in Egypt for some reason. My experience with it was interesting because I'm not identifiably Jewish to a lot of these people because they have a really cartoonish idea of what Jews look like. So I could be in these spaces for a while and hear about everybody's, thoughts about the Jews before telling them that I was Jewish, which was super interesting.
So you're from New Mexico? Tell me about aliens.
So I did not grow up in the alien part of New Mexico, but I still, feel a strong kinship to them, obviously. For me, the idea that the government is not telling us everything that we know about alien visitation or alien technology is reasonable. The idea that we're not alone in the universe is pretty sympathetic to me. So I would say that I believe in aliens in sort of a casual, open-minded, sure, why not kind of way. And so my interactions with the UFO folks were pretty benign compared to some of the other stuff I did. But even in the UFO world, there's all these weird controversies right now about, for instance, whether there are sex slaves on Mars.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this in the intro, right? That it seems to me, and maybe this is rose-colored glasses looking backwards, that when I was a kid, conspiracy theories were kind of goofy and gentle. And that we have, or at least the ones that were mainstreamed, right?
Well, when were you a kid?
In the 90s.
In the 90s. So, this is a relative period of prosperity and social stability that there was a huge resurgence in neo-Nazi groups.
What do you think about Alex Jones now coming out and saying that some of his conspiracy theories he was wrong about and can be blamed on a medical condition?
In his deposition, I think he said that some of it was attributable to a form of psychosis that made him think that things were faked when they're really real. I think that what we're seeing broadly is that Alex Jones is going to say anything to try to get out of these increasingly serious lawsuits. It's been really interesting to watch his depositions because he has always told his audiences for years that he relies on this very deep research and that he has sources in high places. And, when he's deposed, when he's actually under the microscope, he's like, well, I got it off YouTube and 4chan. My staff sees a bunch of stuff.
Tell me about QAnon. What is that?
So QAnon started out as a conspiracy theory or as an idea that there is a secret, high-level member of the Trump administration who is leaving clues on 4chan about this mass indictment and arrest of President Trump's opponents that's imminent. And so Q, this person calling themselves Q, was leaving what Q called crumbs on 4chan. And they're all like completely like unreadably weird, you know, where you're just like, literally, what does that mean? They're essentially riddles. And so QAnon grew into this movement among especially like, it seems like older white folks who are maybe not like digital natives, but it's essentially at its core a conspiracy theory that President Trump is secretly doing a really good job and that his opponents are all going to go to jail and we just have to like wait. But now it's sort of shifting and turning into this like attempt to explain everything. Like it's gotten so sprawling and chaotic. It's like really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think a lot of this language is similar to feelings that people talk about when they're gaming in online communities, where you gather together with other people who are in isolated rooms playing a game to join a quest or to solve a problem, except that in this case, it's real life. And the problem is that 30% of elected officials are pedophiles.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about this, too, with like true crime Reddits, you know, this group of amateur sleuths trying to get together to solve a murder or something, and the ways that it can actually have incredibly like negative and corrosive effects on like the family members, you know, the surviving family members of a murder victim on an actual investigation. Like it feels so tantalizing and exciting for so many people that I think they forget that there are real people involved.
So you're a New Yorker. I'm wondering if you have any favorite local conspiracy theories. We were talking a little bit about the Bay Ridge Bing, which out in Bay Ridge, there was this like recurrent bing sound that people like, well, it's obviously aliens.
Oh my God.
And it ended up being some piece of like offshore heavy machinery that was like tapping the seafloor repeatedly.
love that.
Do you have any other ones that we should know about as New Yorkers?
Oh, what was I just thinking about? Well, there's obviously the weird like Montauk Monster that washed up on the seashore a couple years ago and nobody knew what it was, and it was obviously a monster. And I think now Zardulu has claimed credit for it and said that it was one of her creations. She's sort of she calls herself a myth maker, and she stages these weird events and strange animals around town. That's a really fun question. I just had another one and I completely lost it.
Come back to us if you get it. Maybe we'll tweet it out as a little extra.
There was another one, and I have lost it, but I will let you know.
So one of our producers on the show, Isabel, is really into low-stakes conspiracy theories. One that she's trying to propagate is that birds aren't real. So I'm wondering if you have any like pro tips for her. Like if she really wants to give this legs, that birds aren't real, how would she go about doing that?
I was actually just talking to the guy who created that conspiracy theory.
Oh, tell me about that.
He was, I think, a student at University of Arkansas and is no longer, and just had this idea that, you know, how hard could it be, right, to create a conspiracy theory? And so he actually went viral because he and his friends decided to take their birds aren't real signs to the Women's March and were photographed there. So yeah, I guess if you want to propagate a conspiracy theory, and I don't think you should, but if you want to, it probably helps to be interesting and colorful looking and to be photographed in a public place where people can share it on social media. And if possible, you want somebody like Alex Jones to pick it up. That's like what we've seen, is that like having the accelerant of celebrities. So if not Alex Jones, then maybe the president, you know, he'll tweet anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. Really love the book.
Thanks.
And tell us a little bit about when it's going to be out and where people can buy it.
The book is out on April 16th, and you can buy it, I think, all the places you buy books.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
it is a book. So.
That is my hope.
Yeah.
we will see about that, but that is the theory.
Great. And it's called Republic of Lies. It's by Anna Merlan.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.